My name is Tierney Adley. I'm 33 years old, a city planner by trade. And if you had asked me 2 months ago, I would have told you I had a decent grip on how the world worked. I believed in quiet preparation, financial boundaries, and keeping your head down when things got loud. My father, Malcolm Adley, used to call me his compass. You always see the street layout before the concrete's poured, he'd say. But when I found the envelope, I realized he'd been building a different kind of map all along. It was late October when we held the private memorial for him, just a handful of friends from his early architecture days, a few former clients, Elliot, Genevieve, and me. I didn't speak, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I didn't trust what might come out. Malcolm wasn't just my father, he was my anchor. And now suddenly I was untethered in a room full of people who seemed more concerned with inheritance etiquette than grief. After the service, I walked out alone, refusing the champagne reception that Genevieve had arranged like it was some launch event. The air outside smelled like dried leaves and expensive cologne. My car was parked around the corner, tucked under a maple tree, shedding fast. I didn't notice the envelope until I was already inside, door shut, engine idling. It had been slipped into my glove compartment, marked only with my name, in his handwriting, slanted, bold, unmistakable. Inside was a single object, a small bronze key with the letter T etched into its side, and a folded note. The paper was thick, the ink slightly smudged on the left edge like he'd paused a moment before finishing it. The message was short. Tierney, if someone tries to take what isn't theirs, use this. You'll know when. Dad. That was it. No explanation, no legal jargon, just a key, a sentence, and a warning. My first thought was that maybe he meant a storage locker or a safety deposit box, something practical. My second thought came faster, sharper. Who would try to take anything, and why did he think they might succeed? The answer arrived 2 days later in the form of a phone call from Genevieve. "Hi, sweetheart," she said in her smooth, controlled tone. "I've scheduled the will reading for Friday morning, downtown office. I trust you'll make time." It wasn't a question. With Genevieve, it never was. Genevieve Adley, formerly Genevieve Linton, was the kind of woman who wore tailored ivory suits to backyard brunches and signed birthday cards with just her initials. She married my father 9 years ago after a whirlwind 6-month courtship that began at some urban renewal gala and ended with her moving into our house like she'd been there all along. I was 24 then, just out of grad school, and I remember thinking, she's beautiful. But she doesn't blink when she talks. Our relationship was civil, cordial even, but never warm. We both understood the rules. She had her territory, I had mine. And Malcolm, our only real bridge, never forced overlap. Until he died. On Thursday evening, I found myself sitting in my apartment staring at that key again. I hadn't told anyone about it. Not even Caden, my fiancé, who'd flown out that morning to visit his brother in Seattle. I wasn't trying to be secretive. I just wasn't sure what it meant yet. And until I was silenced, felt safer. What stuck with me most wasn't the object itself, but the phrasing. If someone tries to take what isn't theirs. Not if someone contests the will, or if you need to prove something. No, my father had always chosen words with surgical precision. This wasn't about legality. It was about possession, about something or someone crossing a line. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the time I caught Genevieve in my father's study going through files when she thought I was out. The way she'd smiled at me without blinking, her hands still hovering above the desk drawer. "Just looking for a contract Malcolm asked me to pull," she'd said. I hadn't believed her then. I believe her even less now. Friday came with the kind of gray sky. Portland is famous for soft rain, everything muted. I showed up at the attorney's office 5 minutes early wearing a black turtleneck and wool coat. Simple, functional, non-confrontational. But inside, I was a lit fuse. Genevieve arrived right on time. Elliot, my 23-year-old half-brother, trailed behind her, eyes downcast. He looked tired, like someone who hadn't slept in days or someone caught between two people who didn't trust each other. When the lawyer entered, he carried a leather folder and an uneasy expression. I'd never met him before. That was the first red flag. Malcolm had worked with Deidre Sloan for nearly 15 years. If this man was reading the will, why wasn't she here? Genevieve smiled like she already knew the answer. I didn't say a word. I just reached into my bag, wrapped my fingers around the bronze key, and waited. Because I was starting to understand something my father never said out loud, but had made damn clear in every action he took, he never trusted her. And now, neither did I. I remember the first time I met Genevieve, not the official introduction at some fundraiser or the polite handshake at the tail end of a gallery opening, but the first real moment. It was dinner, just the three of us. My father had invited me, said it would be low-key, which was the first of many lies that night. The table was set like a spread from an interior design magazine, cloth napkins, folded into perfect fans, gold-rimmed plates, stemware that didn't belong in any dishwasher. Genevieve emerged from the kitchen in a navy silk blouse and soft camel slacks, every movement deliberate, every smile measured. She looked at me like I was a guest speaker she had Googled thoroughly but still found unimpressive. She poured the wine herself, asked questions without ever asking directly. "So you're in urban planning," she'd said with a tilt of her head like she was unsure the words made sense. That must be unpredictable. When I said I enjoyed working with cities in transition, she hummed like that confirmed something unfortunate. Later, over grilled salmon and roasted endive, she asked if I'd ever considered stepping into something more stable. I said I liked where I was. She smiled. Of course, some women find fulfillment differently. It wasn't what she said, it was the space around the words, the tone, the way she nodded like she'd already filed me under questionable choices. That was Genevieve's power disapproval cloaked in civility, a razor with a velvet sheath. I had never felt smaller at a dinner table, and yet she never raised her voice or crossed a line. She didn't need to. After that night, I learned how to be fluent in her language. Respond with grace, hold the line, and never reveal the bruise. But this business with the will, this wasn't about tone. This was about power. The phone call came precisely at 10:04 a.m., 2 days after I found the envelope. My phone buzzed against the kitchen counter while I was steeping tea. I saw her name and let it ring twice before picking up. "Tierney," she said smoothly, like she'd been waiting. "I've arranged the reading of Malcolm's will for Friday morning. 10 o'clock, Walsh and Reeve, downtown." There was no, "How are you?" No. "Is that time all right?" Just a place, a time, and her expectation. "I see," I said, keeping my voice even. "I trust you'll make time," she added as if I had a choice. Genevieve had always spoken in statements, never questions. Her world was one of neatly packed agendas and unspoken rules, most of which she'd written herself. When she called, it wasn't to invite, it was to inform. And though we shared no blood, she had somehow woven herself so tightly into my father's legacy that everyone, even Elliot, acted as though she was the family. After I hung up, I stood at the window overlooking the quiet courtyard behind my building. The rain had let up, leaving puddles across the brick path and drops clinging to the wrought iron bench. I tried to imagine my father in a conference room discussing the division of his estate with strangers in suits. It didn't sit right. He would have used Deidre. He trusted her. She knew the contours of his business, his ethics, his careful planning. But Genevieve hadn't mentioned Deidre. She'd chosen a different firm altogether, Walsh and Reeve, one I'd never heard of. That night, I called Caden, told him briefly about the reading. He offered to fly home early, but I told him not to. "It's fine," I said. "Just a formality." But even as the words left my mouth, I knew I didn't believe them. Something had shifted. And not just in the usual way grief warps a room. There was a current running underneath all this, a tension I couldn't name, but could feel in my spine. Genevieve wasn't just organizing logistics. She was positioning herself. That much was clear. And I had the sinking sense that this reading was just the first move in a game she'd been rehearsing long before Malcolm ever fell ill. The worst part wasn't even the power grab. It was the calm, polite efficiency of it. Genevieve never raised her voice, never got angry, never made a scene. She didn't need to. She just reshaped the narrative around her. One tasteful press release, one carefully worded legal document, one public gesture of grace, and suddenly you were no longer the daughter. You were just someone sitting in the room. And if I wasn't careful, she'd write me out before I even realized the script had changed. The office of Walsh & Reeve sat on the 14th floor of a sleek glass building downtown, the kind that always felt more like a bank than a law firm. The waiting room smelled faintly of citrus and something expensive, maybe leather, maybe discretion. I arrived early, dressed the same way I'd handled my grief since the funeral, with muted colors and controlled breathing. My boots didn't make a sound on the marble tile, and I kept my coat on even after I sat. It felt like armor. At 9:59, the elevator chimed and out stepped Genevieve, flanked by two men in matching navy suits. They looked like they came from the same catalog: silver cufflinks, crisp shirts, and expressions carved from stone. Elliot trailed behind them, shoulders hunched under his camel coat, his eyes flickering toward me, but not staying. He hadn't texted me back all week. Now I knew why. Genevieve moved through the space like she owned it, which, depending on what we were about to hear, she very well might. She gave me a tight, professional smile. Tierney. I stood. Genevieve. We were ushered into a conference room lined with soundproof glass. The city sprawled beyond the windows, cranes in the distance, a light mist drifting across rooftops. A man with a thinning hairline and tortoiseshell glasses introduced himself as Richard Lang, one of the estate attorneys from the firm. He cleared his throat as we took our seats. Thank you for coming. As you know, we're here today to formally read the will of Mr. Malcolm Adley. He opened a leather folder and adjusted his glasses. This version was notarized 7 months ago and submitted to our office by Mrs. Adley. Mrs. Adley. The words dropped like a pebble into a still pond. The reading began with the usual boilerplate expressions of love, admiration, a few named charitable donations. Then came the property designations. To my wife, Genevieve Linton Adley, Richard read, I leave our primary residence in the West Hills, all joint assets held under Adley Holdings, and full executive rights over the Adley Urban Redevelopment Trust in partnership with Elliot Malcolm Adley. My spine stiffened. Urban Redevelopment Trust. That wasn't something I recognized. My name hadn't come up yet. To my son, Elliot Malcolm Adley, I bequeath shares in the family's commercial real estate ventures with rights of future ownership upon reaching age 25. I turned my head slightly, watching Elliot out of the corner of my eye. He didn't look pleased. He didn't look anything. His expression was somewhere between guilt and retreat. And to my daughter, Tierney Marie Adley, Richard continued, I offer my love, gratitude, and acknowledgement of the support she has always provided. She has been provided for independently in ways beyond this will. Silence filled the room. Provided for? Independently. It was a careful way of saying, you already got yours. The kind of sentence that let people sleep at night because it sounded generous while doing nothing at all. Genevieve folded her hands. She didn't look at me. Didn't need to. She had the document now. The lawyer, the language, the leverage. Malcolm often said Mom would carry things forward. Elliot offered, suddenly, voice quiet, but deliberate. He told me that just before the surgery, that she would manage the transition for everyone. It took everything I had not to turn and stare at him. Elliot wasn't a liar. He wasn't sharp enough to twist things, but he was easily steered. That much I knew. And right now, he was drifting exactly where Genevieve wanted him. I didn't say a word. I didn't demand clarification or protest the phrasing. I simply stared at the table in front of me and let the silence hang. Because something was wrong. I knew my father's voice. I knew how he wrote, how he spoke, when he was being cautious or kind or clinical. And nothing about what I'd just heard sounded like him. The language was sanitized, impersonal. The phrasing off too symmetrical. Malcolm Adley was meticulous but never mechanical. That, whatever that was, wasn't him. I assume there are no objections, Richard asked, already sliding the next document forward. I looked up slowly, eyes meeting his. Actually, I said, has this document been verified through the county clerk's registry? Genevieve's eyes flicked toward me, sharp and alert. Richard hesitated. It was filed internally, but not yet with the county. We typically wait until after the reading unless there's a contest. I smiled. Good to know. Genevieve smoothed an invisible wrinkle on her sleeve. Tierney, there's no need for drama. There's no drama, I said quietly. Just diligence. And then I stood, thanked Richard for his time, nodded once to Elliot, and left the room. My pulse didn't settle until I was back in the elevator, descending fast and alone. As the doors closed, I reached into my coat pocket and wrapped my fingers around the bronze key again. I didn't know yet what it opened, but I was beginning to understand exactly who it was meant to keep out. It was just after 8 when I heard the knock. Not the kind that demanded attention, but the kind that waited for permission. I'd barely made it through reheating leftover lentil soup when it came soft, deliberate, like someone who knew better than to arrive uninvited, but did it anyway. I opened the door, and there she was. Deidre, I said, blinking against the porch light. I wasn't expecting you. I figured, she replied, her voice low and even as ever. May I come in? I stepped aside and let her in without asking why she was there. Deidre Sloan had known my father since before I was born. She was one of the few people he ever called by her first name, and one of the fewer still who called him Malcolm instead of Mr. Adley. She wasn't a family friend in the soft social sense. She was the kind of ally you wanted when contracts got ugly and trust got tested. She wore her usual slacks boots and a belted coat that looked like it had lived half its life in a courtroom and the other half in a weather report. She moved into the apartment like she remembered the layout from years ago, which she probably did. Back when Malcolm used to meet her here to avoid Genevieve's constant filtering of every conversation that touched money. I followed her into the living room. She sat without ceremony and set a leather folder on the coffee table between us. I'm not here officially, she said, clasping her hands in her lap. Not yet. Okay, I said, carefully lowering myself into the armchair across from her. Then what is this? Deidre looked at me the way people look at you right before they ask if you're sitting down. But I already was. I heard about the reading, she began, and I heard it didn't sound much like your father. No, I said. It didn't. She nodded once, then opened the folder. Inside were 3 documents, each in a plastic sleeve with a set of embossed notary stamps along the bottom corners. They looked nothing like the sanitized paperwork from Walsh and Reeve. These had a different weight to them, older, lived in, like they'd been touched by someone who cared where each comma went. This is the real trust, she said. Your father had it drawn up with me 2 years ago. It was never meant to replace a will, only to sit in the background, waiting. I leaned forward slightly. Waiting for what? For someone to try and take what wasn't theirs. The room went still. Even the faint hum of the fridge seemed to hush for a moment. He didn't trust Genevieve, she continued. He never did. He admired her intelligence, respected her polish, but he didn't mistake either for loyalty. So he planned for the worst quietly, as your father did. And I'm the beneficiary. Yes. Sole. She tapped the second document. This trust controls the Adley Green Redevelopment LLC, an entity your father created, using a portion of the land holdings most people assumed were dormant. They're not. He spent 5 years preparing a low-income urban development proposal. It was going to be your legacy. My mouth felt dry. He never told me he wanted to, but only when you were ready. You were still finishing your city certification exams when he signed the first deed. He didn't want the pressure to change how you moved through your career. I sat back trying to absorb it. My father hadn't just set something aside for me, he'd built an entire framework, quietly, strategically, like always. What's the condition? I asked. You said it's not automatic. Deidre slid the 3rd page forward. It was a single sheet, but every word had the tension of a wire strung too tight. In the event of any contested claim, coercive legal pressure, or attempt to misrepresent the intentions of Malcolm J. Adley regarding Tierney M. Adley's inheritance, the trust shall be executed in full and override all conflicting documentation, whether signed or assumed. I read it twice, then a third time. My father hadn't left me a loophole. He'd left me a tripwire. Deidre watched me with a kind of professional patience that was laced with something personal. This trust isn't just about ownership, Tierney. It's about timing. If you'd never been challenged, you would have never needed it. But now that Genevieve's making her move, it activates. And Walsh and Reeve, they don't know this exists. She hired them. Your father never used that firm for anything substantial. I felt the heat behind my ribs begin to rise. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder, sharper. Resolve. She brought 2 lawyers to the reading, I said quietly, presented that paper like it was gospel. Deidre gave a dry, almost amused smile. Well, she's not the first to underestimate Malcolm's quiet daughter. I didn't smile back. Not yet. What do I do next? I asked. For now, she closed the folder gently. Nothing. We wait. We let her get comfortable. Let her assume you're licking your wounds or plotting your appeal. Let her overreach. I nodded slowly, and when she does, I asked. Deidre straightened her coat and handed me the folder. That's when we remind her what Malcolm really left behind. As I walked her to the door, I felt the weight of the papers in my hand. It wasn't about the property, not really. It was about trust, real trust. The kind someone builds quietly over years, not because they expect betrayal, but because they know one day silence may be the only defense you have left. And now that silence was mine to break, it started with a voicemail. Tierney, darling, just a few quick items I'd love your signature on. Nothing major, just standard estate consolidation. Call me when you have a moment. Her voice, as always, was smooth as silk, layered with concern that felt carefully measured rather than felt. That's since Genevieve never said anything she didn't mean, and rarely meant exactly what she said. I listened to the message twice. Then again. Words like few and standard were her favorite weapons, disarming in tone, loaded in meaning. 2 days later, an envelope arrived via courier. No return address. Inside, 3 neatly tabbed packets with sticky notes that read, Just formalities XG. She'd underlined formalities in lavender ink, like a friend scribbling a note on the back of a wedding program. I didn't sign them. I didn't even open them. Instead, I tucked them into the bottom drawer of my desk and poured myself a drink. The same night, Elliot texted me, short, flat, and cold, Hey, you should talk to Mom. She's trying to get everything settled fast. Just help her out. Mom. He used that word so easily now, like our childhood hadn't existed before Genevieve arrived. Like our mother, my mother had faded into wallpaper the minute Malcolm remarried. I didn't respond. But things kept shifting. An old colleague of Dad's, someone who'd shared drinks and development war stories with him for 2 decades, canceled a coffee meeting we'd planned, claiming he was booked solid through spring. A city zoning contact I'd worked with for 5 years suddenly stopped returning calls. And Elliot, who used to send me dumb memes and late-night you still up messages, now barely responded unless it was about estate progress. Something was moving beneath the surface. A quiet rebranding of alliances. And I was on the wrong side of the press release. It wasn't until Thursday that the ground really shifted. I was walking out of Granger & Co. with a folder of downtown housing grant proposals when I saw an incoming call from Noah Kane, an old college friend turned private banking officer at Sterling Private Capital. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. We exchanged birthday texts, nothing more. I picked up. Hey, Noah. Tear, he said cautiously. This might be weird, but is everything all right on your end? My stomach tightened. Define all right. I had someone come in last week asking to establish collateralized leverage on a block of Malcolm Adley's land parcels. They dropped your name. Claimed you'd be signing off. When I cross-checked internal holdings, I noticed you weren't listed anywhere, but something about the setup didn't feel clean. Who came in, I asked, though I already knew. Genevieve Adley. She was polished, knew her terms, but it felt more like she was prepping for a game of chess than a loan agreement. I closed my eyes for a moment. Did she sign anything? No. Not yet. I stalled, said I needed to verify estate clearances, but Tear, If she's trying to leverage parcels that were supposed to pass to someone else, you might want to move. Thanks, Noah. I owe you one. Just keep your eyes open. She's smart, but she's not subtle. Not really. After we hung up, I stood on the sidewalk, folder pressed against my chest, watching taxis flash by like streaks of urgency I didn't share. Genevieve wasn't consolidating. She was maneuvering, and now she was testing the boundaries, pushing just far enough to see who would stop her. She wanted me to co-sign a few formalities, not for the sake of simplicity, but because she needed legal cover. If I signed, she could move assets, leverage the land, build debt against a portfolio she didn't truly own yet. My signature wasn't a courtesy. It was a key. And this wasn't just about property, it was about positioning. Genevieve was laying groundwork, slowly, elegantly. But the pressure behind it was unmistakable. And if I so much as cracked, she'd call it consent. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Malcolm had already seen this coming. And he'd left me more than land. He'd left me a fuse. Now it was just a matter of timing the match. It was a gray Saturday, rain tapping low and steady against the windows, the kind of weather that made the city feel hushed. I was halfway through a second mug of coffee and sorting grant reports when the knock came. Not the tentative kind from friends or couriers. It was sharp, intentional. I opened the door to find Genevieve standing there in a slate gray coat umbrella, hooked on her wrist, two men behind her in pressed suits, their expressions unreadable but far from casual. Elliot hovered behind them, hands jammed deep in his jacket pockets, eyes darting anywhere but my face. Tierney Genevieve said, her voice warm and rehearsed. Apologies for dropping in unannounced, but we thought it best to handle a few matters face to face. She moved past me without waiting for permission, heels clicking softly against the floor, as if she'd practiced this exact entrance. The two lawyers followed, one setting a thick leather binder on my dining table like it was sacred text. Elliot trailed in last, glancing at me, then looking away. I closed the door slowly. "What is this, a bit of overdue clarity?" Genevieve said with a pleasant smile. She gestured toward the binder. "Just some final documents for estate consolidation. Nothing complicated, more administrative than anything." One of the lawyers flipped open the binder and began sliding pages toward me. "Trust transfer agreements," he said smoothly. "Asset streamlining, a temporary restructuring clause for tax efficiency." The other chimed in. "You're listed here as a cooperating party. It ensures compliance in line with the primary will's instructions." I stared at the first page, legalese stacked like bricks, phrasing engineered to lull or mislead, then the second, then the third. "Why are there trust transfers here?" I asked, eyes narrowing. "That's not administrative. That's a reassignment of control." "Temporary," Genevieve purred. "It's a common move, allows us to manage the estate more fluidly until things settle. Think of it as a courtesy." "To whom?" I asked flatly. She didn't answer. Elliot finally spoke, his voice brittle. "Tear. Maybe just take a look. It's not a big deal. Mom, Genevieve, she just wants to simplify the process. Dad wouldn't have wanted this dragged out." I turned to him, and he'd want lawyers showing up at my door. Elliot flinched but didn't reply. I pushed the documents back across the table. "No." Genevieve tilted her head. "You haven't even read them. I don't need to," I said. "Not when they're wrapped in velvet language and handed over with lawyers like bodyguards. If this were legitimate, you'd have gone through my counsel, not my front door." One of the lawyers opened his mouth, perhaps to object, but another voice cut through the air before he could. "She's right." We all turned. Deidre Sloan stood in the entryway, umbrella in one hand, her sharp gray eyes locking onto the scene like she'd been watching from the sidewalk. She stepped inside, without invitation, rain still dripping from the edge of her coat. "I suggest you all pack up those papers and leave," she said evenly, voice calm but edged with steel. "Because those documents rely on a will that's already under scrutiny. And until that scrutiny clears, you have no enforceable authority." Genevieve turned to her, still smiling. Deidre, always such flair for timing. I also have flair for filing injunctions, Deidre replied. If necessary, but for now, consider this your only warning. She looked toward the lawyers. You're trespassing. You're misrepresenting contested legal authority. I can call the police, or you can take your fake consolidation packet and walk out. Genevieve didn't flinch, didn't blink. She smiled. Then without protest, she gently tapped the binder closed, gave Elliot a glance that felt like a silent reprimand, and turned toward the door. We'll be in touch, she said to no one in particular, then breezed out with both lawyers in tow. Elliot paused, eyes landing on me again. There was guilt there, and something else. I didn't say a word. He followed her out. The door clicked shut. Deidre exhaled, dropped her umbrella near the coat rack, and looked at me. You okay? I nodded once. She's not subtle anymore. No, Deidre said. She doesn't need to be. She thinks she has the stage. She doesn't, I said. And now she knew she wasn't the only one with a script. The call came just past 6 a.m. I was still tangled in sheets, the sky outside barely a shade lighter than black when my phone buzzed to life against the nightstand. The name on the screen jolted me upright. Deidre Sloan. Hello? I rasped, heart already bracing for bad news. Tierney, she said without preamble, her voice clipped and low like she was trying not to wake the world around her. We have a problem, a serious one. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. Tell me. My office security system flagged a breach attempt around 2:11 a.m. Someone tried to access the physical files in the back records room, the room I keep locked, unless I'm reviewing trusts or wills. The doors reinforced, but they rifled through the outer cabinets. My breath hitched. The trust intact, she said quickly. They didn't get to the right drawer, but they were looking for it. They knew what they were after. Do you have footage? I asked. I pulled it the minute I got the alert. Her voice went tight. It was Genevieve's assistant. That tall one, Emily. Blonde bob, wore red at the mediation last year. She used to work for your firm. I murmured, remembering vaguely how Deidre once mentioned firing an assistant who got too close to a client's son. She still had an old badge, Deidre said. One I deactivated, clearly not enough. The entry logs flagged the card swipe, but she must have known the security delay. She had about 90 seconds before the silent alarm went to my phone. She was out before patrol showed up. I stood in the middle of my bedroom, the chill of the floor sinking through my socks. She was looking for the trust documents. No doubt in my mind, Deidre said, they're fishing for leverage or destruction. Either way, we need to act. Officially. I didn't hesitate. File the motion. There was a beat of silence. Are you sure? Once it's in the court system, Genevieve will know she doesn't just have opposition, she has legal exposure. She'll escalate. She already has, I said. Showing up at my home with lawyers, sending Elliot to guilt me, and now breaking into your office. I shook my head, voice hardening. She doesn't think I'll defend what's mine. She thinks I'm scared to go public. Let's prove her wrong. Deidre exhaled slowly. I'll draft it this morning. Motion to protect with supporting evidence of the break-in attempt. Emergency hearing by end of week if we're lucky. Thank you, I said quietly. We're not done yet, she replied, but this is the line in the sand. You ready to hold it? I've been holding it my whole life, I said. We hung up and I stood still for a long moment. The air in the room felt heavier now, like the whole building leaned toward the next step I was about to take. I thought of Emily, her clipboard always in hand, her cool smile at those charity luncheons, the way she once complimented my father's cufflinks like she was already part of the family legacy. Of course she was Genevieve's shadow now. Of course she'd do her bidding. It wasn't just a break-in. It was a message. We're watching. We're willing. The brazenness of it made something shift inside me. For years, I'd played the silent daughter. The one who smiled at dinners, accepted half-truths, let my father shield me with distance instead of answers. I hadn't raised my voice at the will reading. I hadn't even confronted Elliot when he stood silently by, while Genevieve tried to leverage everything into her image. But this was my breaking point. By noon, Deidre emailed me the draft of the motion petition for emergency protective injunction regarding contingent trust documents of the estate of Malcolm J. Adley, filed under a private code, citing internal footage security system logs and breach intent. Emily's face was clear in the screenshots. A timestamp showed her rifling through drawers with gloved hands, pausing only at the one she couldn't open. Attached was a brief note filed today. Emergency review granted. Hearing set for Friday at 2:00 p.m. Day yes. I stared at the time. 4 days. 4 days until everything changed. I sent a single text to Elliot. You should know. Genevieve's assistant broke into Deidre's office last night. There's footage. A motion has been filed. No reply. Not that I expected one. By evening, my apartment felt like a quiet fortress. I turned off the news, ignored calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and sat at my kitchen table reading every line of the trust again. My name. My father's initials. The clause he wrote himself. In the event of misrepresentation, coercion, or breach of faith, execute fully. I closed the file and looked out the window as twilight slipped into the city skyline. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel like I was chasing my father's legacy. I was protecting it. And no matter how polished her tactics, no matter how many lawyers or late-night break-ins Genevieve sent my way, I had something she didn't. The truth. And now the court would see it too. The office was quiet when I arrived, too quiet for a weekday. Deidre had told me to come early before phones started ringing and staff filtered in. She was already at her desk, a legal pad filled with scribbles in front of her, one hand wrapped around a coffee mug that had clearly gone cold. I found something she said the moment I closed the door behind me. I didn't sit yet. What kind of something? Deidre tapped the manila folder beside her. A prenup. Malcolm and Genevieve's. It was filed back in SOT 07, sealed under a separate estate account that hadn't been referenced since. I blinked. Wait, Dad and Genevieve had a prenup. Deidre looked up at me, her eyes sharp. He insisted on it. You know your father, generous in sentiment, meticulous with legacy. I remembered he made me review it once years ago when they were refinancing a property in Vermont. But I didn't connect it to this fight until I went digging through the archive for unrelated real estate agreements. I sat down, slowly, pulse starting to thrum. And she slid the folder toward me. I opened it. The language was tight, clear, unmistakable. All assets acquired independently prior to this union, including but not limited to properties, trusts, corporations, and land holdings, shall remain the sole domain of the originating party and are exempt from joint claim or probate inclusion unless explicitly amended post-marriage. Deidre spoke softly, like she was reading my reaction more than the words. This clause alone dismantles most of Genevieve's claims, especially the redevelopment block, the company, the land, the long-term leases. All of that was Malcolm's project well before she came into the picture. I stared at the page, then flipped through the supporting documents. Dates, titles, signature logs, his initials at the bottom in that tight, confident scrawl. She knew, I said finally. Genevieve knew this prenup existed. Maybe Deidre replied, but I'd bet she assumed no one else remembered it, least of all the daughter who's supposedly too sentimental to care about the legal spine of her father's empire. I let out a quiet breath, more measured than relieved. This means the redevelopment company is off the table. It's not part of the family trust. It's mine, uncontestably. Deidre nodded. With the sealed trust already in motion and now this on record, yes. You now hold both ownership and legal immunity, even if she tries to wrap it into probate under some familial contribution claim. The prenup blocks that path. I ran a thumb along the edge of the paper. I could almost hear my father's voice behind these clauses, measured, careful, a man who knew how ambition warped when unguarded. He must have known Genevieve would make a play. He'd built these protections like dominoes, quiet and patient. All I had to do was follow the line. She's going to lose it when this comes out, I said. She's going to escalate, Deidre corrected. People like Genevieve don't retreat. They reframe. Watch for sympathy spins or an attempt to make you look like the cold one. I smirked faintly. She's tried that before. And now you have the documentation to make it irrelevant, Deidre said. She leaned back, voice steady. You've got leverage, Tierney. Not emotional leverage, legal, strategic, the kind that doesn't just stop a challenge, it embarrasses it. I looked back at the clause. So simple, so definitive. She thought I'd be too polite to look, I said. No, Deidre replied. She thought your father would have forgotten to shield you. She underestimated both of you. The silence in the room shifted then, no longer heavy, no longer waiting. It felt like something had finally clicked into place. We were done playing defense. Now we had position, and the next move would be ours. I found Elliot where I figured he'd be tucked into the back corner of Hollow and Bean, the coffee shop near campus, where he used to study in high school, and pretend he wasn't part of a family with too many houses and not enough quiet. He was hunched over a cold cappuccino earbuds dangling from one ear, but he looked up the second I stepped in like he'd been waiting for the confrontation all day. I slid into the chair across from him. No preamble, no warm-up. Why'd you stand there and say nothing at the reading? He rubbed the back of his neck, sheepish. I didn't know what to say. That was your mother handing you land and leverage she has no right to. You knew it wasn't Dad's voice in that will. Don't pretend you didn't. He looked at the table. I did. I knew. Silence pooled between us for a long moment before he finally said, she said if I questioned it, if I pushed back, she'd pull my health insurance. Said she'd cancel my tuition payments for grad school. That I'd be out of the house by the end of the month. No support, no fallback. I blinked. She blackmailed you. She pressured me. He corrected quickly, but even he didn't sound convinced. She made it sound like it was temporary, like I just had to play along for a little while until things settled. That she was protecting the family's image, not stealing anything. And you believed that his shoulders lifted, then dropped. I wanted to. I studied him, the curve of his jaw that still hadn't fully hardened, the nervous tick of his fingers tapping the side of the mug. He wasn't malicious, just scared, just 24 with one parent buried and the other holding every lifeline he thought he had. She's playing you like a pawn, I said gently, but I won't. He looked up, then guilt creasing the space between his brows. I didn't mean for this to blow up like this, Tierney. I just wanted peace. There's no peace when someone's trying to erase what's real, I said. This isn't about money. It's about control. She's turning Dad's memory into a tool, and you're letting her do it. I know, he said softly. I see it now. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But I also knew Genevieve. She didn't leave loose ends. If she saw Elliot slipping, she'd tighten the noose. I'm not asking you to take my side, I told him. I'm asking you to stop being used, to think for yourself. He nodded slowly, eyes downcast. Can I have time to think, really think? I searched his face, unsure of what I'd find resolve or retreat, fear or clarity. But what I saw was a boy torn between a house he didn't own and a legacy he didn't yet understand. Yeah, I said finally. Take the time. I left the cafe without turning back. I didn't know if he'd follow me out of that shadow or stay tethered to the woman who knew exactly how to make obedience look like loyalty. But I'd spoken the truth. And now the choice was his. Whatever happened next, at least he'd heard it from someone who still saw him as more than a pawn. I was halfway through my second cup of black coffee reviewing site renderings for the Eastbridge block when my phone lit up with an incoming call from a number I didn't recognize, but the name that followed sent a chill through me. Sterling Private Capital. I answered immediately. Tierney Adley speaking. Ms. Adley. Good morning, came a smooth voice, male, crisp, neutral. This is Lucas Brenner, Senior Lending Officer at Sterling. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Not yet, I said cautiously. What's this about? I wanted to confirm something on a preliminary loan application we received yesterday. He said, tone polite but tight. The application lists you as a silent co-signer on a parcel loan package, specifically the redevelopment parcels held under Adley Interior Holdings, LLC. The The application states the collateral value at approximately $14.8 million. My stomach nodded. That company was placed under personal trust protection weeks ago. No one besides me has authority to use it as collateral. Yes, ma'am. That's why I'm calling. The application was submitted by a Mrs. Genevieve Adley. She claimed you were aware and had given what we call silent consent, non-executive approval, requiring no formal signature but implicit agreement due to family association. I closed the renderings. That's a false statement. I suspected as much, he said, sounding relieved I hadn't hung up. We've held the application in review. No funds have been approved and nothing will move forward unless we receive direct written confirmation from you. But I thought you'd want to know it came through with confidence. She presented it like a formality. She's trying to leverage something she doesn't own, I said slowly, forcing calm into my voice. Thank you for flagging it. I'll place a hard hold on the file and notify our compliance unit, Lucas added. But you may want to consider issuing a legal objection just to be safe. If anything moves on the back end, we're legally covered, but it wouldn't stop a third-party lender from attempting a secondary agreement based on perceived validity. I understand, I said, and I'll be following up with legal action today. We hung up, and I stared at the phone for a beat heart pounding. She was getting bolder. No more hints, no more smiles over estate documents. Genevieve had made her move. She wasn't waiting for court. She was banking literally on me staying silent. But she miscalculated. I called Deidre. Her voice was brisk the moment she picked up. I'm filing a cease and desist within the hour. She already submitted the paperwork I asked. She did, and she listed you as a silent cosigner. I'll be adding that to our court file under fraudulent representation with intent to defraud a financial institution. It'll show a pattern. First the break-in, now this. She's trying to drain value before the courts can even rule, I said. She's trying to make it so messy and convoluted that no judge wants to touch it without months of review, Deidre corrected. But this stunt might actually help us. I blinked. How she overreached. Again, this shows intent to misappropriate assets under legal dispute. Judges don't like that. And Sterling is a respected bank. If we subpoena their logs and get Lucas to confirm what she said about your silent consent, it'll help frame Genevieve as reckless and manipulative, not confused or grieving. Will it hold up in court? With the footage from the break-in, the prenup, the trust, and now this, yes. It's forming a very clear pattern. She's trying to get to your inheritance by any means short of murder. A bitter laugh escaped me. She's not subtle anymore. She's not careful either, Deidre said. I've already filed for an emergency hearing. You'll be in court next Thursday. Good, I said. Let's end this. After we hung up, I sat back in the chair and stared at the clean lines of the architectural renderings on the table. They represented years of vision, my father's legacy, my work, our values. Not a bank loan. Not a pawn in someone else's hunger. Genevieve thought she could file a few papers, drop my name in fine print, and I'd fold to avoid drama. But now the courts were watching, and so was I. I parked outside a modest gray building on Wyndham Street, one I'd passed 100 times, without realizing what it held. No brass plaque, no flashy signage, just a clean concrete facade with a small mailbox that read, Adley & Tier Holdings, LLC. The registered office of my father's final company. The woman at the front desk greeted me with a kind but curious smile. You're Ms. Tierney Adley. Yes, she nodded, standing. Mr. Adley said that if you ever came, we were to give you this. She pulled a sleek gray folder from a locked drawer, the paper slightly worn at the corners. And he left instructions to let you walk the floor alone. No one else in the space until you're ready. I took the folder with trembling hands and stepped past the reception area into a long hallway that opened into a large, quiet room lined with drafting tables, corkboards, and framed sketches along the walls. It wasn't the typical real estate office. There were no glossy posters of condos or glass towers. Everything here felt hand-built, lived in, purposeful. I opened the folder. Inside were a set of architectural blueprints, large-scale complex, and covered with notes in my father's looping handwriting. Sustainability first. 4-bed units, solar integration, shared gardens, modular construction, scalable. Each page revealed a layer of his vision. Not luxury, not profit margins. Community, integrity. Behind the blueprints was a sealed envelope labeled simply Tierney. I slid it open and unfolded the thick cream paper. His writing was steady and familiar. My girl, if you're reading this, it means I'm not here to explain it in person. But you already know me well enough to understand I didn't believe in leaving money for the sake of money. I believe in legacies that build something. Yours is meant to grow, not to sit in some cold account. This company is yours. I built it for you, quietly, because I knew you'd question if you were ready. But you were always ready. You were the only one who ever questioned the system pushed for better, asked what came after success. The trust exists not just to protect you. It exists to protect the mission. This isn't just about property or inheritance. This is about stewardship. You're not a beneficiary, Tierney. You're the architect. You told me once after Mom died that our values were what made us different. That a family should be more than a brand. That stuck with me. Your values are your inheritance. The money just pays for them. Love always. Dad, I sat down on the edge of a workbench and just breathed. All this time I thought I was defending land, documents, percentages on a ledger. But this space, this letter, this vision, it was something deeper. My father hadn't just secured the business in my name. He had designed it for me, around me. It wasn't about outwitting Genevieve or navigating probate. It was about realizing that I was already at the helm of something he believed in, enough to hand over without ceremony. I walked to the far end of the room where a corkboard displayed a site plan with the title Hawthorne Grove, Phase 1. Affordable eco-homes for mixed-income families with space for community gardens, elder housing, and even artist studios. It looked nothing like the glossy Adley developments I grew up hearing about. This wasn't prestige architecture. This was meaningful. I ran my fingers along the edge of the plans and whispered, "You really did believe in me." The weight I'd been carrying, the fear that I was just reacting to Genevieve, just trying not to be erased, shifted. This wasn't about reclaiming something stolen. It was about honoring something planted. Genevieve could file all the fraudulent claims she wanted. She could circle banks like a vulture. But she'd never understand this space, this vision, because she wasn't written into it. I was, and now I knew exactly what I was fighting for. We met in one of Deidre's smaller conference rooms, a polished glass box tucked in the back of her firm's office. Neutral ground, no plaques on the wall, no family portraits staring down from mahogany. Just fax files and the sharp smell of peppermint from a diffuser someone probably thought would take the edge off. It didn't. Genevieve arrived 5 minutes late, of course, poised, pressed, and in her signature navy-wrap dress. She had Elliot in tow, his expression unreadable, jaw tight. 2 paralegals flanked them like stagehands in a courtroom drama. Deidre and I were already seated. No dramatics, just readiness. A court recorder sat quietly in the corner, as did 2 firm-appointed witnesses. Notary seals, time-stamped agendas. We weren't playing dress-up. This was real. Genevieve barely glanced at me before sitting down across the table, placing a leather portfolio in front of her like a shield. "I assume you have something to say," she said coolly. I folded my hands. "Yes, I do." I nodded at Deidre, who handed out neatly stapled sheets to everyone at the table. "That I said is the agreement I'm offering today. It's not a negotiation. It's my terms." Genevieve smiled without teeth. "Terms for what exactly? For resolving this before it gets worse for everyone," I said. "Before more of Dad's reputation gets dragged through court filings and bank reports. Before Elliot's grad funding disappears in a blaze of depositions." Her eyes flicked to the paper. She didn't pick it up. But Elliot did. His lips moved silently as he scanned. "Clause 1, I said, my voice steady, offers Elliot 5% equity in Adley and Tier Holdings. It's non-voting but profitable. A stake, a future. on the condition that he withdraw from your legal representation entirely, no testimony, no signatures, no silent endorsements. Genevieve scoffed. Bribery now. No, I said calmly. It's a door, a way out, for someone who's been used. Elliot didn't speak, but he didn't put the paper down either. Clause 2, I continued, outlines the only offer you're going to get, Genevieve. 0 financial claim, 0 interest in the trust, the company, or the properties. In return, you sign a full legal release, a formal apology for misrepresentation, and you agree on record never to act in any personal, legal, or advisory capacity related to the Adley estate ever again. Her head tilted. And if I don't, Deidre didn't blink. Then we proceed with criminal filings, including the one already in queue. Genevieve laughed, an elegant, mocking sound that made my jaw tighten. Please. That assistant footage, a scared young woman in a hallway. No one will convict on that. I tapped the small black speaker next to me. A light blinked green. The screen behind us came to life. Footage played, grainy but clear enough. Genevieve's assistant using a long, outdated ID swipe, bypassing the alarm with a code. Opening drawers, pulling files, taking photos. One of those files clearly labeled Adley and Tier Trust. Your assistant doesn't look scared, I said. She looks trained. Genevieve's smile vanished. We traced the badge access, Deidre added. It hadn't been active since 2019. You reactivated it the week after the will reading. Silence. Elliot slowly lowered the paper, his face pale. Is that real? He asked, voice low. She didn't tell you, I said, looking directly at him. She said she was just streamlining paperwork. But she was trying to erase you too. Your name wasn't in the new filings, not once. Genevieve's face hardened like marble-controlled fury, not panic. I won't sign that, she said flatly. You will, I said. Because if you don't, the bank statements, the false co-signature, and that footage all go into open court. Your name will be tied to attempted real estate fraud, trust tampering, and unlawful access of legal records. Every developer Dad ever worked with will see the headlines. And Elliot, he'll lose more than tuition. He'll lose every ounce of credibility you've been borrowing from his father's name. Deidre slid a pen across the table. Genevieve didn't move. For a full minute, she didn't blink. Then, with a soft exhale, she picked up the pen. I want the apology phrasing revised, she muttered. No revisions, I said. This isn't about preserving dignity. It's about acknowledging the damage. She signed, quickly, sharply. Her signature sliced the page like a blade. When it was done, I turned to Elliot. Your call, I said gently. He looked at me, then at her. Then, for the first time that day, he picked up the second pen, the one meant for him, and signed. The room was warmer than last time. Maybe it was the early spring sun pushing through the conference window, or maybe it was the lack of legal pads and silence thick enough to choke on. We weren't here to posture anymore. This was cleanup, closure. Genevieve sat across from me again. Her composure was still intact, barely. She'd traded her courtroom navy for a soft taupe cardigan and pearls that looked like they were worn more for symbolism than style. To her left, Elliot was quiet, his face unreadable, but not withdrawn. And on my side, Deidre sat with one last folder, her expression cool and final. This is the concluding statement and filing packet, Deidre said, sliding the file across the table. Once both parties sign, it will be entered with the probate court. A judge will certify closure of all contested claims. Now, as agreed, a sealed record will protect Elliot's name from public litigation logs. Genevieve didn't reach for the file. She sat perfectly still for a beat, then looked at me, not the folder, not the papers, but directly at me. Her voice came quieter than I'd heard it in weeks. You think I wanted this to become a war? I didn't answer. She sighed. I only wanted to protect what Malcolm built. I've known him since we were in our 20s, Tierney. I knew him before you were born. I knew the vision. I lived it. I folded my hands. Then you should have started by not stealing it. Her lips parted. I didn't. You filed a false loan application using my name, I said calmly. You attempted to access a sealed trust. You tried to get Elliot to pressure me into signing over land that didn't belong to you. That's not protection. That's strategy. And you lost. Her knuckles whitened on the table's edge. You don't understand what it meant to Malcolm to keep the family unified. I leaned forward. I understand exactly what it meant to Malcolm. That's why he left you out of this. Because he knew you'd twist it. He knew you'd come with lawyers with manipulation dressed as good intentions. He didn't trust you with his legacy. He trusted me. Silence rang like a bell. Elliot looked down at his hands, then slowly pulled a folded sheet of paper from his blazer pocket and placed it on the table. Deidre reached for it. This is your withdrawal from all legal proceedings involving the Adley estate, correct? Elliot nodded. Yes, I'm out. Genevieve turned sharply. Elliot, I read everything he said, not looking at her. And Tierney's offer is fair, more than fair. You're taking her side. I'm taking Dad's side, he said. This isn't a game, and you knew what you were doing the whole time. I don't want to be part of it anymore. Genevieve stared at him for a long second, then slowly turned back to me. Her voice was brittle now. I gave my life to that man. You think you earned all this because of some values scribbled in a letter. I didn't flinch. I earned it because I respected his vision enough not to exploit it. Deidre slid the final signature page across to her. Sign here. And we're done. Genevieve stared at it. The moment hung suspended 3 decades of quiet power she'd built in Malcolm's shadow, about to end in black ink and thin paper. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the pen. You'll regret this, she whispered. No, I said gently. You will. Not because you lost, but because you thought winning meant control, not meaning. She signed. And just like that, it was done. No fireworks. No slamming doors, just the sharp scratch of a pen on paper and the quiet realization that everything she'd tried to steal now stood completely out of her reach. Deidre gathered the papers, sealed them into a final envelope, and stood. A court courier will file this within the hour. As of now, Ms. Adley is the sole controller of all Malcolm Adley assets under the redeveloped trust. Genevieve Elliott, thank you for your attendance. Genevieve rose. So did Elliot, but before she left, she paused, hand on the doorframe. She didn't turn around. You'll see. It's harder than it looks. I met her gaze in the reflection of the glass door. Good legacies always are. Then she left. I stayed for a moment longer, just breathing, just absorbing the quiet not as a threat but as peace. No more proving, no more defending. It was finally mine. On my terms. I never imagined seeing my name etched onto a zoning map. But there it was, Tierney Adley Director, an Adley Green District Initiative. I stood beneath a banner tied between scaffolding poles flanked by 2 teenage interns in hard hats who looked like they already owned the block. Maybe someday they would. The district hadn't fully broken ground, but the momentum was real. Community meetings, blueprints rolled in the back of hatchbacks, coffee-stained sketches reviewed in folding chairs. No boardrooms, no padded chairs, just people doing work that mattered. I'd hired local, urban designers from city colleges, landscape architects who had grown up in the neighborhoods we were restoring. We weren't just building structures, we were building back ownership, 1 block at a time. One of our first workshops was for high school girls Design the City You Want. We taught them about deeds, zoning codes, property taxes. Many had never been told they could own land, let alone shape it. That was the moment I loved most. When someone asked, wait, this is yours, and I got to say yes. And it can be yours too. Dad's original blueprints sat behind glass at our temporary office, not to be preserved like relics, but to remind me that vision starts with a pencil and a question, what will this block become? Who gets to decide? It was a Tuesday when Caden showed up dressed down and holding ginger tea. I always pretended not to like. He was standing near the lot where the orchard would grow, watching quietly. You're not wearing a tie, I teased. You're the one running a district. He smiled. We stood together watching the construction crew frame out runoff zones. Then he reached into his jacket, not with fanfare, just a small ring box, plain and soft. I still want to build something with you, he said, not just foundations and housing, a life, one where your name is why I stay. The ring wasn't flashy, a green stone, practical, sustainable. I laughed. You're trying again. He nodded. I took the box slipped on the ring. It fit like it had always been mine. This time, I said yes. The call came on a quiet Thursday while I was knee-deep in soil at the community garden. I almost let it go to voicemail until I saw her name, Genevieve Adley. Her voice was still polished, but softer. Tierney. I heard about the district. Congratulations. I didn't respond. I'd like to contribute, she said. Not financially, just something that belongs more to what you're building. This isn't a reconciliation, I said flatly. I'm not asking for one, just 20 minutes. In public. We met at a small cafe near the northern perimeter, Dad's favorite. She chose a patio table facing the street. No entourage, no makeup, just Genevieve, smaller than I remembered, or maybe just human. She pulled a folded sheet of thick ivory paper from her purse. Her handwriting, elegant and slanted, covered the page. It's not for court, she said. I signed it, but there's no clause. Just words. For you. I read it quietly. To Tierney, I misjudged you. Not just in ambition, but in understanding. I tried to control what wasn't mine, because I couldn't face that Malcolm had already chosen. You didn't fight with fire. You fought with vision. That's what he saw in you. What I failed to. This isn't a legal apology. It's a human one. Genevieve. I folded it slowly, placed it in my bag. Do you believe it? She asked. No, I said. But I believe you meant it. And that's enough. She nodded, then stood to leave. No hug, no theatrics. As she walked away alone, I felt the weight of that paper in my bag, not as proof, not as leverage, but as closure. Quiet, clean, enough.